Naofumi Iwatani. Back in his world, he was an inventor, a creationist, someone that created everything, someone that invented various things to help the world succeed, to help the world flourish. In his world, advances were simple. He was able to create everything at a whim. His intelligence was sky high, and he would figure out anything. You want to talk about inventions? Well, think about from video games to infinite energy. That's what Naofumi would be doing. Everything you can think of, that's what Naofumi did. He was someone, an inventor, a creation, an artist. Everybody knew Naofumi and knew that he was this famous and basically hulking figure, this amazing figure in their society. But he would then disappear out of thin air one day while writing data codes for his brand new invention. And well, where would Naofumi go? Well, we'll find out right now on What If Naofumi was the legendary creation hero. Yo, what is good, everybody? It's your boy Golden Falls Golden What If, whatever you want to call me, and I'm back. I am back with, actually, I believe this is going to be a movie. I'm kind of committed to the fact that it's going to be a movie, so excuse me, you'll know pretty soon or not soon if it's a movie or not. It will literally say it, but we are here with What If Naofumi was the legendary creation hero. Don't worry, Jedi Hero will come out the next day. I'll have that, and then probably a start to a new series as well. But yeah, I seen a lot of y'all wanted, after the Destruction Hero, wanted Creation Hero. So I thought, why not? Let's give it to y'all. Little heads up, this is not going into Season 2. I know some of y'all probably want that, but I know a lot of you don't actually know what's going to happen in Season 2. So you guys are like anime only. So I don't want to go into Season 2 and then have people not want to watch it because of this or that. And not enough people have read the light novel for me to feel as to go into Season 2. Plus, we don't really know what's going to happen in Season 2, at least in terms of anime. I do go based off of the anime canon, not the manga canon or the light novel canon. So after I literally saw, which you probably saw earlier, was my reaction and review to the first episode. And yeah, it's a little different than the beginning of Season 2 in the light novel, technically. So that'll be like Volume 6. It's a little different. So, yeah, keep that in mind. Maybe I'll, once we get about halfway through the season, I'll probably do that. But, yeah, that's about it. I'm not going to waste much more of your time. Sorry I rambled on a little bit there. I just wanted to say that. But, yeah, that's about it. And let's just get right into the what if. Let's get it. During the process of gathering data and coding a bunch of things, Naofumi is transported to a brand new world. He's not so sure how this would even have occurred, thinking it's some sort of teleportation device that he didn't know about. But he looks to his left to see 3 other people. The clothing they're wearing, it's very odd. He's never seen people wear this type of clothing. Back in his world, everyone wore a certain specific style, something that fit the Earth a lot better. Being that the sun was a lot closer to Earth nowadays, the climate was a lot worse. So Naofumi came up with a special clothing that would actually help them, making it so that everyday life was basically perfect and simple, and it didn't matter. There's perfect insulation and the Earth never burnt up based on certain things he created. So when he looked at them, he immediately began to think that they have to be from a different world, that it wouldn't make sense. How would they even be living on his Earth? But then he looks at their back, seeing one has a bow, then a sword, and then a spear. They all have different weapons. Naofumi looking at himself, seeing he doesn't really have anything, just a gem on the clothing of his chest. Or at least that's what he thought. It's actually a gem that is directly in his chest. He's actually kind of scared to see this, about how this gem even got there. He begins to tap on it as the other heroes look at him confused because, well, he doesn't even have a weapon, and frankly, they're just as confused at why they're even there. Knights then approach them and begin to explain that the king wants to speak with them. They say that they don't want to speak with anybody until something is explained and what is even going on. in which the knights say to not worry and that the king will explain everything. So when they arrive at the king's throne room, he begins explaining everything that's going on, but then sees that the shield hero is actually not present. It's someone different. It's just someone with a gem in his chest. He's not so sure about this, but he won't really think up too much about it, asking if they are the heroes, in which the knights and everybody else confirm, but it seems like the shield hero wasn't summoned. And he's kind of happy to hear this, introducing himself to the other 4 heroes as they introduce themselves as well, one by the name of Itsuki, one by the name of Matayasu, then Ren, and then Naofumi. Naofumi introduces himself, and they all kind of give their occupations or what they're doing. Naofumi being the only one that actually is something else, not just a college student or a high school student, but even the other 3 heroes don't believe him. But he explains that in his world, he created a multitude of inventions, and frankly, the only reason why the Earth is on the upkeep is because of him and his team. In which they still don't really believe him, but the king technically doesn't really have any reason not to believe him, per se, and just says that it's fine and that he will go on with whatever he's saying at the moment. And Naofumi just shrugs as the king begins to explain the waves, a series of demonic invasions where more or less it's just running rancid on the kingdom, but doesn't tell him about the other countries, saying that they are here to protect them from the waves. And the other 3 heroes immediately ask about compensation. Naofumi agrees compensation would be very, very important in this scenario, in which the king says of course, and that it is getting late, so they will basically head in, take a sleep, and the next morning they will all get party members for their journey. So that's what he does. Naofumi and the rest of the people, or the other 3 heroes, go to a nice hotel room and begin chatting. They actually question Naofumi about everything, and it seems like his logic is pretty flawless. It seems as if he knows everything he's talking about, and the other heroes are forced to kind of believe him about who he is. That's when Naofumi brings up the fact that they are definitely from different worlds, in which the other 3 heroes are confused, but that is later confirmed via basically the different video games they play, and the different presidents and commissioners and stuff like that, in which Naofumi already figured this out, and they ask how that would make sense, and he explains that in his world, that clothing they're wearing would have had them killed. And they ask why, and he explains that the sun is actually closer to Earth now and would have incinerated Earth without the inventions that him and his team has made, including the clothing, and that's why his clothing looks the way it does. They are confused that the clothing doesn't really seem too bad in terms of out of style or anything, and Naofumi explains that there are insulators in the clothing. It's a very complex process that involves a lot of nanotech and various other things, in which they are shocked to hear this, and now they're kind of forced to believe Naofumi in its entirety because he's very, very intelligent, and that's blatantly obvious. So after all of this is said and done, they all head to sleep and then wake up the next morning and arrive at the kingdom. And they begin to basically wait for all the party members that are there, or the adventurers, to pick what party they want to go to. But when Naofumi is waiting, he actually sees nobody goes with him. It seems like, yes, Naofumi is a smart guy, but he doesn't really involve himself in video games too much, in which he does admit that is true, and also, he doesn't even have a weapon. And he does think about this. That is true. The other 3 have a weapon, but he kind of just shrugs, asking if it's possible to gain other team members throughout this world, and the king says of course, that he apologizes for the inconvenience, and he'll even supply him with 2,000 silver pieces, just for, well, basically to make things a little easier for him. He says it's truly no problem. He'll take the silver pieces and head to a weaponsmith and try to figure some things out for the future. In which the king says that he's not so sure how that would work because the other heroes normally aren't able to actually use weapons of not their kind, so he's curious to see how he would be. In which Naofumi has already figured out how to look at his HUD menu and various things, learning the ins and outs of this world, being that it's very similar to video games he's played. Yes, he does make or has made video games in his past, but that was like really, really early on in his career. But on top of this, it's just coding. Simple coding, and he's really good at basically inventing anything. So he's able to look at this coding and actually figure it out relatively easily and get a gist for it, figuring out the ways to level up and basically earn skills. It seems like he's actually known as the legendary creation hero. He finds this to be actually pretty fitting for him, especially with what he's done in his past. But even with that said, he's gonna have some road bumps. It seems like the only way for him to actually get a weapon is through creating it, or also creating anything else he can possibly think of. Maybe he can speed up the process by going to a weaponsmith and learning more and more, but that's where it kind of draws the line. He's not so sure how this would work. So he heads over to that said weaponsmith, and when he meets the man by the name of Erhard, he actually begins explaining that he is a hero, but his, well, way of things is a little different. He's actually an inventor, and the weaponsmith is kind of confused by this, but then he eventually believes him as Naofumi begins to tap all the weapons, and it seems like he's learning how to create all of them at the tip of his fingers. But the only problem is, these are all basic weapons, and it seems like there is no leveling up said weapons. He can only create. He cannot necessarily make them better. At least that's what he thinks for now. He can't create a weapon, at least at this magnitude, in terms of, well, because it's going to be extremely weak. Because if he makes the weapon, then there's no guarantee that he'll even have success using it. And frankly, he personally doesn't even really know how to use these weapons very much. So he begins to think maybe he should start with proper clothing. He asks if he can see the other clothing as well, and he begins touching all of it, more or less learning how to create basic clothing and then eventually some more higher level stuff. But now that that has occurred, he actually looks at how he creates these weapons. It seems like he personally injects experience points into said weapons. Base weapons that are basically the ones that are super simple or not very strong are able to be made instantly. But the only problem is they are extremely weak. They don't level up with him, and frankly they are just really limited in all versatility. But even with that said, he has to start somewhere. So he makes a simple sword and goes out with armor that he has on and begins to slice up monsters. In terms of, well, just the simple balloon animals that are only level 1, or the balloon monsters who are only level 1, it's pretty easy to kill them, but once he gets to the slightly higher level ones, he definitely sees how tough it's going to be. He feels like he is basically just some ordinary adventurer, at least with the weapon he has. His stats definitely help him in terms of base stats, but other than that, it makes things extremely difficult. But of course, Naofumi, being as smart as he is, he begins to come up with various ways of handling such a thing. And as the creation hero, he believes that he should start creating. He begins to absorb anything he can find, from wood to trees to leaves to anything, even dead monsters. And while he does this, he begins to basically build up infinite amounts of material. It just, at least the material from the monsters. This allows him to do various things, make various clothing, armor, stuff like that. But more importantly, eventually he seems to be able to actually make some sort of hybrid monster. As a creation hero, he can actually, it seems, tamper with genetics, but also tamper with monsters or even just beings in general. He does see that this is very inhumane to a certain extent, so he does start with the idea of maybe creating a monster from scratch, giving it a soul in a way, and it seems like him as the creation hero, he can do just that. He does notice one thing though, that his experience points don't level up too fast in terms of maybe slaying monsters. Maybe that's because he's such a low level and it's not a powerful weapon he has, but he does think that maybe creating stuff will be a really good way of him leveling. So he begins to actually get a room. He gets a room in like this hotel and begins creating. All night he's working on this type of stuff. Creating. Eventually he makes a robot-esque version or a synthetic version of the small balloon monster he was fighting. It seems like this monster isn't technically registered as one of his companions or a monster underneath his party, but it does actually involve one of his skills. It seems like that monster turns into a skill of some sort, and he can actually inject it with XP, or as long as it gains XP, it could even get stronger unless it gets killed. Of course, if it gets destroyed or killed, then it will just go back to normal and it will go away forever. Nothing will be permanent as long as, well, it is alive or dead, so on and so forth. So he continues to make things and train normally, but realizes that this is pretty slow nonetheless, making these small robots or synthetic robots that aren't very strong. These monsters, these small balloon animals, die pretty quickly, especially against higher level monsters. He believes that if he can replicate other monsters that are stronger, maybe it will be actually beneficial, but for now it seems like, well, it's very not that useful, you could say. So one night he's coming back basically to his motel room and he's stopped by someone. He stopped by actually 3 people. A group of bandits begin to try and attack him, but with his small contraptions and synthetic monsters, he's able to defeat them relatively easily. But even with that said, he knows there's massive limitations on the monsters he's controlling, or the synthetic beings that he's controlling at this moment. Just as he begins to think this though, the slave market owner begins to approach him, asking if he wants to see something very interesting. In which Naofumi isn't sure how to respond to this, but he eventually decides to walk with the man into a building. He actually shows Naofumi various, well, slaves. These slaves are basically varying in different levels, and Naofumi is asking if it's really ethical to even have slaves. In which, well, the slave market owner says that you could say that these are legal. Maybe ethics aren't his thing or aren't your thing, but it is legal. So Naofumi decides that, well, he doesn't really want a slave. He doesn't want to take one. He'll feel bad. Ethical reasons, he doesn't want to. But the slave market owner says he can always not have the slave crest on them. He looks around to see actually a small girl. A small girl with raccoon-like ears and a raccoon-like tail, saying that he'll take her. And he's confused. Why would you take her? Especially because, well, she's kind of sicker than a dog. But Naofumi says that's not the point. He wants to give her a better place, and he can take care of the sickness, hopefully. And, well, the slave market owner says that, well, heroes are going to be heroes, and he pays, well, about 20 silver for the little girl. He heads off and begins to take Raphtalia to the motel room that he has and begins to explain to her the plan, saying that he personally is a hero and he struggles to level up, but he's going to try his best in leveling up and actually creating new items. But everything's going to take a little bit of time, and having her being able to fight by his side will definitely be beneficial, in which she's kind of scared about. She's never really been a fighter and hasn't fought really at all, but Naofumi says that he will give her all the means to do so, and once they start leveling up, everything will become way quicker. Naofumi will get even stronger, getting even weapons that are extremely powerful for Raphtalia and for anybody else who's in his party, and they'll continue to grow at an exponential rate. In which Raphtalia isn't really sure about this, but just goes along with it. Frankly, Naofumi is the nicest person she has seen in a long time. So he takes her and basically creates a medicine that cures her instantly and actually boosts her up to a level of 2. Naofumi's shocked to see this, but then remembers maybe it's like when he creates something he gets XP, and maybe something happened since she's in, well, his party now. Maybe now she gets XP since he used that medicine technically on her. But Raphtalia is all cured up and feels so much better, in which she is shocked to hear or even see, feeling that there was some magic potion that she just drank. But Naofumi says that it was no magic, he just created a more or less something that would cure her. It's nothing exactly like magic, it's called medicine. But even with that said, Naofumi begins to train Raphtalia, teaching her how to fight on her own and other things like that, getting her a simple weapon to start out with in which he can create on his own, and gives it to her, and it's something very basic, nothing strong, honestly as strong as Naofumi's weapon, so it's nothing you could say too powerful. But right when Raphtalia outgrows said weapon, Naofumi gives her another one, and it's actually one that he created via experience points. Something he learned when he reached level 15, he can actually embed experience points in weapons, but then they are basically given their own leveling system. And it's a little less, I would say, complex than Naofumi's leveling system, but it definitely is beneficial for the wielder. So he gives Raphtalia the weapon, and she sees that it lights up as if it was some glowing yellow blade on top of, well, the regular blade. She's shocked to see this, and something comes up on her own screen, and she views this leveling system for that said sword. She begins to say that she can't take this sword, and that for one, she's too small for it, that it's too powerful, and Naofumi says that just sounds ridiculous, and that the sword will actually grow with her when she is at least on the older side of things. In which she nods, but she says, why doesn't Naofumi have anything this strong? Like, this is really powerful. But Naofumi says that not to worry, that he's actually working on said thing, and that he will get around to giving himself something very strong. So their training then goes on once again, but unfortunately his money is running a bit thin. With all the stuff he's been buying from market to market, more or less just storing item after item after item, trying to get all these materials for various weapons that he wants to make, and various things he has in mind, it's actually running him kinda dry. He's only about 500 silver left, and that's only been about 5 days. So he decides to ask Erhard where they can actually go to maybe make a quick buck. He then points them to Loot Village, leading to them actually heading off toward there, asking the locals where he can actually make some money. And they say that there's a nearby mine, that this mine is a little bit dangerous though. It is actually swarmed with monsters from, well, the wave, and that they have to be extremely careful because frankly it is not a safe place to go, at least not right now. They all listen, and Naofumi and Raphtalia listens, and they head off toward the mine to actually get some ores to hopefully sell. When they arrive, they begin mining the ores, and it seems pretty basic. Naofumi takes the ores and even embeds them into his gem once again, getting more and more materials that are actually going to benefit him in the long run. But one thing he is missing is maybe various power sources, something that can be energy-like in a way, but that's kind of not really possible in this type of world, but maybe it will come about sooner or later. He doesn't think too much about it, at least not at the moment, because maybe power sources could involve XP and stuff like that, but he just continues to mine the ores, absorbing them or keeping them in his bag. As he does this though, a monster then appears, a two-headed dog monster, something that terrifies Raphtalia, making her fall backwards. Naofumi turns around and sees this said monster and tells Raphtalia that everything will be fine and that she can actually beat this thing. She's not really convinced of this. She's terrified. She thinks that she will die just like her parents and that Naofumi will die just like her parents because of her. But he shakes his head, saying that he promises that she's strong enough and that she can overcome this. She pulls out her sword, and as she does so, the energy around her sword begins to lengthen further and further, making this long sword-like blade. Naofumi smiles and sees that she's actually gotten a hang of it and is actually using her light magic currently. Naofumi does know about these magics because he's gone to practically every shop, and when he gave her this weapon, it did turn into very similar to light magic. So he assumes that this light magic may be like a razor cutter, like some very condensed molecules that will slice through most things. So now Naofumi watches as Raphtalia charges forward. He reaches out his hand and something appears behind the monster, clamping down on its leg and not letting it go. It's like a giant bear trap. Naofumi learned that he can actually create things on the spot as long as he knows how to make them. From bear traps to other traps in general, he's actually able to, well, get them stuck. He then throws a net over the monster, giving a free kill for Raphtalia. Naofumi is shocked that it worked that well, but is happy to see it. The fact that he has even more control over basically creating things on the fly is definitely something to behold. And even doing this, he got more XP on top of that because of him making the items. But even with that said though, he does realize he needs a weapon for himself. Without a weapon for himself, well, you could say it could get really sticky. It's not going to be that easy in the future by him just laying traps or setting up basically defenses and setting up different traps like that. But even with all that done, Raphtalia is happy to see that she was able to conquer her fear of the two-headed dog, and Naofumi is as well, being that their training will actually be really rich and beneficial from here on out. For the next month or so, they train. That's all they do. Level up, level up, level up, and Naofumi is able to help a great deal. Being that he is the creation hero, he's actually found various different ways to actually train. And he's creating various different capture techniques to basically gather up tons of monsters or even attract all of them to one spot where he can defeat all of them in one go. This leads them to actually both, or at least Naofumi being at a level of 40 and Raphtalia being at a level of 35. Naofumi has continued to make synthetic monsters and various other things like that. He hasn't come across really the best way to more or less power himself up, but he does have a substantially effective weapon. A long sword very similar to Raphtalia's, but his sword is a little different. It is actually able to channel energy via his XP. It lowers his defense by a drastic amount, pouring tons of all his other stats into his more or less attack stats, giving him insane strength. But the only problem is it reduces his defense by a lot. But he can also do this in terms of his armor. He can transfer all the experience points into his armor, making him super tanky, just not being able to hurt anything by any means, doing basically 1 attack damage every time he swings his blade. He knows that he has to be very careful in terms of this, because if he advances his weapon so much that he has no defense, he gets hit with 1 attack, it might put him down for good. But this is more or less the only way they can really go about it, at least for now. So he decides that he'll balance it more as a 75-25, 25 into defense, or 25% into defense, and 75% into offense, as a way for him to more or less try to keep up with Raphtalia. Actually, Raphtalia is extremely powerful, especially with the weapon that was given to her. And, well, Naofumi still is pretty strong in his own right, especially with more synthetic monsters, but there's some limitations with how much he can do personally. But of course, having synthetic monsters is a benefit to him, so if you were to say overall who's stronger, obviously Naofumi would basically be a lot stronger than her. But if you just take it as Naofumi and Raphtalia could be argued that she is personally stronger than a solo Naofumi. But with that said, they are working together as a team. It's not like they are going against each other, so it will be able to complement each other pretty well. They then head to the Dragon's Hourglass and figuring out that actually the wave is in 24 hours. Naofumi has been creating various things, high-level potions, really good mana or SP gathering potions, and various other things as well, and even something for Loot Village. He realized that Loot Village would most likely be under attack, so he actually created a really strong barrier around Loot Village. It has some XP basically intertwined. Every time he was killing things outside of Loot Village, it would be basically absorbed within that barrier or within that simple, mostly like a wooden picket fence you could call it, but just really tall. And it's more built around magic, you could say, but it's more of just the power of the creation hero. So it's this invisible barrier that may only look like picket fences or small wooden walls, but it's actually not the case. It's a pretty strong fortification. But while they're there at the Dragon Hourglass, the 3 heroes actually do arrive, saying what's up to Naofumi, not really talking that much, but also seeing Raphtalia. Motsuyasu approaches her and tries to, flirt with her in his own awkward way, but that doesn't work at all. And he even questions why she would be with someone that doesn't even have a weapon, but Naofumi flaunts his weapon immediately, being this longsword, in which he puts it away, and Ren kind of mocks him, saying that he definitely copied him, but he kind of just shrugs, saying that he likes the idea of a sword, and the reach advantage definitely helps him in the long run. And obviously he has some things to attend to, so he'll be saying his goodbyes. While they leave, all 3 of the heroes are kind of confused. They haven't seen much of Naofumi throughout this time, but he does seem pretty powerful. but he seemed so weak in the beginning. He seemed like he was struggling against small monsters, but now he's like this? And what was that on his belt? They look like little capsules. Well, Naofumi has created something very, very interesting. Small capsules, very similar to obviously the one in Dragon Ball, breaking the fourth wall here, but very similar to ones you would use to store various things. He uses it to actually keep his synthetic monsters, but also his other, well, weapons and tools, being like, you could say, simple pickaxes, maybe a long-range weapon, stuff like that, but nothing crazy. He also has an option for a musket, but he actually doesn't use the musket very much because he hasn't really advanced that very much at all. Guns are definitely a benefit for Naofumi, but at least at this moment, he can't create anything strong enough to be substantial. At least his sword is that much substantial, and maybe throughout the next, well, section before the next wave, he'll start upgrading his musket and maybe even go more and more in terms of the creations, in terms of guns and other types of weapons and other types of armor. He isn't quite sure where he wants to go with it, but he'll keep all of that in mind. After everything is settled and put into place, Naofumi and Raphtalia head off to Loot Village to more or less just see how well their protection is going to go, and also they're going to roam the outskirts of Loot Village to slay any monsters that are outside the barriers in relatively quick fashion. So the wave then begins. The skies begin to become purple and it begins to open up. Everything begins to pour out in terms of monsters, and it seems like the hornets, the skeletons, and various other monsters actually can't get through the barrier that Naofumi has made. Loot Village is extremely happy to see this, but the monsters are still just beating on the barrier over and over and over again. Naofumi and Raphtalia decide to go out themselves, slicing through all of the monsters, feeling that this is very easy. They over-prepared by a long shot easily, but it's better to be safe than sorry, I guess. They continue to slay monster after monster, getting substantial amounts of levels, bringing Raphtalia up to almost level 40, being that she almost has enough for her class upgrade, and Naofumi being at level 43 to level 44, he's actually seeing really good growth from here on out, having a powerful weapon now in terms of his longsword, and having decently strong armor. It seems like he's basically on the up and up. But he does believe having Raphtalia as that melee unit, or that melee person to be in his party, well, he should get something that's more long range. It would be a lot more beneficial, and like he said, well, the end of this wave, he will start upgrading various other weapons that are dealing in longer ranges. So Naofumi, after the wave is finally over, heads over to where the boss was defeated, seeing that the monster is in complete shambles, and he decides to actually skin the monster, cut it up, and basically absorb most of it and then turn the rest into food for the local villages. After doing so, actually, Naofumi finds that a lot of the material he got from the Chimera is really beneficial to what he wants to do. Actually, really beneficial to his weapon, which giving him a new blade using the talons of the Chimera, and also it seems that he's able to make new armor that is basically strengthened by the strength of the Chimera, and also it's this thick lead-like armor that doesn't feel too heavy, and it does give him decent mobility. It's actually kind of odd that he's actually able to make this armor that feels thick in a way and works as if the armor was super thick. If you tried to stab through it, it would be practically impossible. But at the same time, there's a lot of mobility to it. He's actually really impressed that he was able to do such a thing, and he believes that his creativeness and his inventiveness is infinite, especially in a world like this. Maybe he can even make contraptions, anything that would far exceed the technology that is here, and maybe even far exceed the technology back at his homeworld. But with that said, they're actually all invited, or at least Raphtalia and the rest of the heroes and their parties are invited for a state dinner. So he heads over to the kingdom to get that said dinner all handled and dealt with. He eats some food with Raphtalia and they just hang out. But Motoyasu and, well, his little control freak of a female by the name of Mine approaches him, saying that, well, Raphtalia was bought from a slave market. Motoyasu immediately confronts Naofumi about this, but Naofumi says that there is no slave crest on Rautalia, and he's actually been taking care of her. And she says that is the case as well, and that there is no slave crest. Well, then Mine walks over, pulling down Rautalia's shirt slightly to see where if that is true, but Naofumi slaps her hand away, telling her not to do that, that is super embarrassing for Rautalia to especially grab a female in that way. That's really disrespectful, and it's kind of ironic if you know the canon of Shield Hero, but definitely Mine thinks that this is disrespectful, and Motoyasu, though, on the other hand, doesn't even agree with Mine, at least not in this circumstance, and this won't even lead to a duel. Mine being overbearing and looking for the slave crest, and there being none at all, and also the fact that Naofumi has no overly bearing sense of personality, and also they have nothing against Naofumi in the first place. Their little duel will really never happen. Motoyasu actually kind of apologizes in his own Motoyasu way, as Naofumi and Rautalia just head out because they don't want to be there anymore. They head back to Loot Village, do some leveling up and all of the other sorts, as well Mine and Motoyasu approach Loot Village. Mine begins to say that they're going to be taxed an extensive amount, 50 silver coins to enter and to leave, and also raising the prices on everything there. But Naofumi disagrees that this cannot be happening and even speaks with Motoyasu. And Motoyasu is a little bit more in favor, but Mine is getting really frustrated, saying that, well, he deserves it, that he's one of the heroes. But Naofumi says that if anything, Naofumi, that himself, he should be the one protecting this village, and he was protecting it during the wave, and the villagers agree as well. And with everything kind of on the up and up, and Mine being, or seemingly being worse as a person, they actually are forced to actually leave at this moment, especially when a shadow appears explaining that she cannot be doing this. This then does lead to Naofumi deciding that maybe it's for the best that he does get some party members. He looks around the village of Loot, but realizes that nobody really is suited exactly to help out. So he decides that he's going to go back to the slave market owner and maybe get another slave just without a slave crest. But this time around, he actually is offered something called a gacha egg. A gacha egg that will actually hatch a Filolial, or at least at minimum, and he decides to buy it. But this time, he does get the slave crest, being that this is a monster. So he doesn't want to, you could say, well, stretch himself thin in terms of trying to train a monster, and it might get really harsh. But later on, when the monster is completely coherent and mostly mature and stuff like that, he'll take off the slave crest if he sees that to be the best course of action. So after that happens, it's a lot of him taking care of this egg, and eventually a Filolial does hatch and grows up exponentially. During this time, he actually does head off on a journey with Rautalia and who he names Philo. They head off and begin journeying to try to find some more villages. But when they take a break and actually head to sleep, he wakes up and a giant Filolial is there. But not only that, not too long after, well, Naofumi sees that giant Filolial, well, really fat Filolial, change into a little girl. He immediately throws a robe over her, and Rautalia questions what the heck that was, and what did he do, but Naofumi says he did not do anything. He doesn't even know what just happened. And Philo explains that she's Philo, and they're kind of insanely confused. But luckily, Naofumi does have clothing for her, making it actually in no time, and he makes actual armor for a Filolial. And it seems like this armor is very blended in with her skin, but on top of that, when she's in her human form, it's more like a dress. So there's not really a dress showing when she grows in size, but only when she's like this little girl form. He was actually able to embed experience in it, and it gives armament to Philo, and she's able to upgrade it herself. He explains everything to her, which she understands to a certain extent, but is still kind of confused. But he doesn't really think too much about it, and explains everything to them. That the way his whole leveling system works, or more likely explains it to Philo. in which she doesn't understand the entirety of it, but understands only the key points, which that's all that really matters. And he explains that he's not going to necessarily give her a weapon. He doesn't think that she needs it, but they are going to do something about her talons and her feet. That could be a good way for her to fight. Maybe even her wings could actually be a really good way to have a weapon there. But he needs to iron out and basically get some specs before he can do such a thing. She is super excited to hear this, and Rautalia is kind of pouting, basically saying that she isn't getting the attention that Philo is. But Naofumi reminds her that he did get her that fancy sword and is currently working on armor for her as well, in which she says that she is grateful for it, and they begin to head off once again. During this journey though, they do run into this odd trader person. And when they meet with this trader person, it seems like they really just need a ride to a certain area. So he decides that he'll do the favor of doing so, and he takes the trader all the way to this village of some sorts, and the trader asks how he could repay him, and Naofumi explains that he just wants to learn the whole course of action in terms of trading. Skills, contacts, stuff like that, if he can help him out, in which the trader says, of course, that he can definitely help him out, teaching Naofumi the basics and teaching him as much as possible. During this time, Naofumi is picking up on various things, but Rautalia and Philo are actually training up and leveling up. Rautalia has kind of been instilled with the idea of, well, you have to level up to gain XP towards your weapons, so she tries to find every moment of the day to do such a thing. And her weapon is extremely strong at this point, Naofumi considering to actually upgrade it, because if he gets a stronger version of the weapon, it can start at the level or the strength that Rautalia has it at, but it would be like resetting the level entirely. But that's a whole nother project, especially with him still working on her new armor, and now Philo's, well, more or less weapons. But with that said, he now has all the information from the trader, and decides that he'll take on more or less any journeys he wants. For now, the trader doesn't have much, and just tells him to kind of roam around, check things out, in which Naofumi does. Roaming around, finding out that in a nearby abandoned alchemist tomb, that basically had this cursed seed, well, that seed is kinda gone. That's not very good, he can obviously tell, but maybe and hopefully whoever used that seed used it properly to the point where not everything is going to all hell. But the next day, when he's tasked from the trader to deliver a herbicide to a nearby village, Naofumi gets a really uneasy feeling. So him, Rautalia, and also Philo head off to find this so-called village that is basically in need of this herbicide. But during this journey, while in the cart that they basically truck along, he begins to tamper with the herbicide. He actually has invented a lot of things in his own world in terms of basically restricting plant growth. With the sun being closer to down toward Earth, at least in his world, everything is kind of haywire, especially plants have developed a tendency of growing wild with the extra sun, but also various other things have happened throughout the entirety of the time, from water being practically none to water being over apparent. Anything you can really think of in terms of the earth collapsing, well, Naofumi has gone through it. So he basically hypens up makes the herbicide even stronger, and then heads off to see what this village is all about. When he arrives, he sees monstrous plant after monstrous plant, in which they just walk by in terms of the smaller monsters arriving at the village. He asks what's even going on, and they begin to explain that the spear hero Motoyasu tried to end their local famine, and when the plant sprouted using this seed, it came alive and started attacking villager after villager. And with Motoyasu gone, there's practically no way they can even survive. If Naofumi doesn't do something about it, they're all gonna die. And Naofumi says that's kind of why he's here, and to really not worry about it. They're extremely grateful as Naofumi begins to head toward the monstrous plant, pouring the herbicide in a nearby monster as it just threads through all of the plants, immediately destroying all of them. Philo and Rautalia are kind of shocked to see this, asking how he was even able to do that, and he begins to explain that he was able to create this herbicide, and normally in his world it worked pretty well, but in this world it seems to work even better, especially because he gets this 50% boost in terms of, well, special concoctions. And since anything he creates is based around his experience and his level, he actually has an extremely powerful herbicide. And this is when he learns that depending on his level, let's say he's level 50 and he creates a sword based around him being level 50, it actually makes that sword extremely strong. He didn't exactly know how this worked in the first place, but experimenting with this herbicide actually gave him a better point of view of how exactly it works. With all that done and the plant completely defeated, he heads up toward the other villagers, and they begin saying that there's no way for them to actually have food, that they have no way of sufficing, in which Naofumi throws out a capsule, and when it erupts, it has tons and tons of various different seeds. He begins to explain that he experimented with this a long time ago, or at least about a couple weeks ago, and made various basically unique breeds of different seeds, and that these should work a lot better than the one they tried to use that turned into a monster. He only wishes that he got here first and he could have gave them these for their local famine. And they're extremely happy to see this, that now they have something that will actually be sufficient, not something like that where it was practically a curse. Naofumi agrees and says that it's truly no problem, but unfortunately he'll have to go, leaving them another capsule, saying that this capsule actually has more or less defense mechanisms embedded within it. It's actually just simple picket fences or large wooden walls that they can place around their village, and it will act as some sort of hybrid force field, all based around Naofumi's level. He gives it to them, in which they start building as he begins to leave. When he leaves, he is tasked with a new job. This new job is to deliver merchandise to a nearby hot springs. And when he arrives there, it's pretty simple. They just deliver the merchandise, and they all just relax in the hot springs overnight, and then stay the night, have a nice rest, and wake up the next morning for their next official job. But that next official job isn't necessarily coming, because he learns about a nearby village and its mysterious disease that is spreading through it. When Naofumi arrives, he sees tons and tons of people that are practically dying. He's able to come up with some sort of anecdote, at least in the moment, and gives it to all of them, and they're somewhat cured, but the problem still lies. The fact that there is still a rotting corpse above them, Naofumi is going to have to go and handle such a thing. So he heads up, and he decides that he's going to surround it in this barrier that he's able to make. He throws a capsule toward the monster, and it covers it entirely in this clear like bubble. The monster tries to then awaken and get up, a zombie dragon now upon them, but the zombie dragon seems to be stuck, unable to actually get out of the bubble. And Naofumi, seeing that the monster was getting up, he poured every ounce of level into that. He's able to extract his levels after basically injecting them or force injecting them within a different basically weapon or a different thing like that, but he does make him extremely weak. If the dragon were to get out at this moment and shoot a fire blast at him, he would most likely instantly die. Naofumi though is completely encapsulating the dragon and begins to more or less smash it completely. Naofumi wasn't sure about what to do with it entirely, but being that it is a zombie, he decides to take it upon himself and defeat the said dragon, in which Philo and Rautalia are surprised about how fast he was able to handle such a thing, but Naofumi just kinda shrugs, saying that it kinda was convenient that he had something like that on him, and he's glad he's been making a lot of defense mechanisms for various other places. So actually in that scenario, it worked out pretty well. After defeating the dragon though, he actually just consumes the dragon entirely into his gem. When he does this, he actually absorbs this odd crystal that is within the dragon, and the power that it's emulating is insane. He's not sure what the hell it even is, but he definitely has a use for it. He might be able to use it as some sort of power source. Naofumi and his party head off and speak with the locals once again, telling them that they have gotten everything cleaned up. They thank him profusely for it, and Naofumi just heads off without saying much more. When he begins to head back toward the capital, he actually spots someone in the fields who is playing with the Philolials. Philo runs out immediately, wanting to go meet this person, and it seems like they hit it off immediately. Philo runs back with her and says that the girl is lost, and that she asked to be accompanied back to the capital, in which Naofumi really doesn't find a problem in this at all, and decides to bring her back. On the way there, they do a couple pit stops, but nothing too crazy, and of course they train from here and there, but nothing obviously insane. When they arrive back at the capital, Melty goes off with Philo, and they begin to just run around and have a good time. Naofumi speaks with Raphtalia about getting their class upgrades, but right when he begins to speak about this, a spear comes hurling at him, in which he's able to dodge slightly and basically just move out of the way, as Motoyasu is there and goes to strike him once again. Naofumi, upgrading his armor to 100%, not being able to strike himself, takes the blow on the chest, and nothing even happens. He's actually on par with Motoyasu in terms of strength, so he's actually able to tank his attacks relatively well, but obviously with 100% defense, he cannot do any offense. He tells Motoyasu to stop striking at him and to cut it out, and he begins to say that he cannot let Naofumi have Raphtalia and Philo as his slaves, and that Philo is just a little girl. But Naofumi brings up the fact that Philo is technically a monster, in which Philo comes back with Melty, and Melty tells them all to stop. With royal knights behind him, she reveals that she is the second princess. And Naofumi, before Melty continues, tells Philo to transform into her Philolial queen state, in which she does just that, showing Motoyasu that she is a monster, in which he's really confused by this, giving him a sense of, not clarity and not being able to feel like the hero in this scenario. He begins to actually kind of be confused, and he looks toward Mine, as Mine says that they're both slaves, and Naofumi, he has to be an awful person, but Motoyasu is slowly but surely gaining his senses back a little bit, that he definitely seems to be getting manipulated. At least that's what it feels like from here on out. So Motoyasu will keep basically a closer eye on what Mine is doing, at least for now. With all that cleaned up, Naofumi gets the rundown from Melty about who she is. Not only is she the second princess, but she is the heir apparent to the throne. And she explains that she kept this from him because she was afraid that he would not really take this very lightly, but when all this occurred, she decided to reveal it. Naofumi takes none of this personally. He hasn't gone through any trials and tribulations in terms of the people around him. At least the closest thing that he's even come to was the whole Motoyasu thing. But even that didn't really get him down. He's always been a very positive person, and he just, feels blessed in the entire scenario. In his world, he was coming up with invention after invention, and everything started to kind of plateau. Getting sent to this world was kind of a breath of fresh air, ironically enough. Of course, he doesn't like the idea of risking his life every single day, more or less, but he does like the idea of trying to help people even in a totally different dimension. So he doesn't take anything like this, especially from Melty, anything like that personally, and begins to just tell her that they actually need to go get their class upgrades. Naofumi has some things that he wants to actually create and make in the next couple hours or so, at least before the wave begins, and believes there to be about 48 hours until this next wave. She asks how he would know that, and he pulls out a little pocket watch, showing that he actually tracked the wave and made an invention that allows him to track it completely, even remotely. She's actually pretty shocked to see this and is kind of impressed, but she then brings him to the Dragon's Hourglass to get him his class upgrades. But when they arrive, it seems like the people that are there refuse to give him such a thing, refuse to let him get the class upgrades he so desires for his party members. And Naofumi is confused, asking why is that the case, And they really don't give a straight answer, but they do say that they're not going to give a hero that's not part of the 3 heroes church, well, their class upgrades. Melty tries to dispute this, but even Naofumi doesn't care enough to really argue, explaining that it doesn't really matter and he does have 48 hours before this next wave. He'll train himself, figure some things out, and everything will end up to be fine. And then he'll head over to another place, probably a nearby country, and maybe they'll have an hourglass. In which she does confirm. She says that there is an hourglass, well, closest one would be in Shield Frieden, but she says that he shouldn't have to even go through that he should just be able to get it right here. But he just shakes his head, saying it's fine, that it's really not too big of a deal, and that he'll be off to Loot Village to actually work on stuff. And Raphtalia and Philo will go with him because he kind of needs to actually their measurements so that he can get them new armor and weapons. In which Melty asks Naofumi if he needs anything from her, and he says just to be safe and to really not worry about anything, that he will handle it. So he goes to Loot Village and begins to make and actually makes brand new armor for Raphtalia, something sturdy but flexible but extremely powerful, and she can choose in terms of stats how much she puts within it. But the more she uses it, the stronger it's going to get, and it's all based around her level 40 state. And she even gets a new sword, very similar to her previous one, but this one is at a start level of level 40, so now it's at a higher potential than the past one. And Philo, on the other hand, actually got some modifications to her wings, giving her very sleek metal wings that are super thin bladed, so it literally feels like she's just moving around her own feathers. But that's actually not the case. If she lands a blow with these wings, they are extremely sharp. Also at a level cap of, or starting at the level cap of 40, and on top of that, she also has an upgrade to her clothing, which isn't too big of a deal, because frankly you can't really give her armor. He decides against it because it would be too complex, thinking that the wings were complex enough, and making everything like that would be extremely hard, at least at the level he is currently. He might be at a level of 55 to 60, but even so, he's not that creative in that short amount of time. It would take days, maybe even weeks to do something like this. But he decides against it for now, at least in terms of not wanting to hurt the mobility that Philo has. He also gives her some talon based attacks, basically sharp metal talons that she can use to kick people with, which are also at the level cap of 40 and are extremely powerful as well. And Philo, of course, can more or less just output all her attack into that, or at least all the percentage based things into just her melee weapons. Raphtalia does have a little bit more choosing in terms of defense to attack, but still it all just benefits the stats entirely. Their stats are all based on the points that are given to those weapons or that armor. All the stats play with those. Now Fumi, on the other hand, it may be more potent this way, but it's a lot more risky. His stats are all based on his level, not the weapon's level. Yes, there is a contribution to himself through the weapon's level, but he really does need to find that perfect balance between attack and defense. Frankly, he doesn't really have that, because if he puts 80% into his attack power, then his defense is so obsolete that he could definitely find himself into serious trouble. On the other hand, if he puts too much into defense and not enough into attack, he's basically a liability on the battlefield, and that he will only be able to just tank attacks and not be able to strike back. He wonders how someone with a shield would even be able to basically do something like this without very, very similar techniques, or very specific techniques. He begins to think that, well, someone with a shield, basically with only defense, it would be extremely difficult. Luckily, he doesn't have to deal with something like that. After basically helping out Raphtalia and Philo with all their weapons, he starts working on his own. But during this time, he actually catches basically rumors of a bunch of refugees that really need help. So him, Raphtalia, and Philo head over to check out what's going on. Arriving at a refugee camp, that said refugee camp actually was fleeing from this, tyranny, or this tyranny. And actually they were more or less begging for food, starving at this point. So Naofumi, throwing one of his capsules, gets them plenty of food. Luckily he had a lot to spare, and a lot of things he already prepped throughout this entire time. He has tons and tons of stuff in his capsules, and they actually started living in this small shack that he keeps in his capsule as well. The more and more he creates, the more and more capsules he has to make, so he just has labels on everything. So he just throws them out depending on what he needs. But he helps everyone out, learning that actually Itsuki was the one that caused this revolution of some sorts. But it just put a new government into power, just as corrupt as the old one. And unfortunately, well, they need to know what their wrongdoings are. Naofumi heads back to the capital. Once he arrives, Ren and Itsuki question him about the money that he got from helping those people in the nearby town that he saved, and the same thing with Itsuki. But he does explain. He explains that, well, Itsuki started a revolution, but then just put someone back into power that was just as bad. And Ren, on the other hand, he killed the dragon but didn't dispose of it, causing a plague. He reminds them this is real world stuff, that he came from a world that was practically crumbling, and that he needed to invent everything to save it. Keep in mind that, well, consequences do matter in this world, and that there are rotting corpses. There are people that will suffer from bad politics. That's just the thing in this world. He explains that all of it, just keep it in mind, and that treat it as if they were at their homeworld. Treat it as if they were like the president of their homeworld. And they never even thought of it like this. The president of their own world. Like, what would they do if they were in that power? How would they have to solve problems? And, well, this will help them in the future, especially with the mindset like this. Naofumi, being that he's more or less he's obviously an inventor, but he loves the environment. He does try to protect it the best he possibly can, and that's pretty prevalent in all the stuff he's done back in his homeworld. So, luckily and hopefully, he will get through to Ren and Itsuki, but Motoyasu is the one he's more worried about than anything. But after their conversation, there's only 24 hours left before the next wave, and Naofumi feels like what he's making right now, well, it's just not going to be done in time. Unluckily enough, it's really not. It's more of like a prototype at this point, but he hopes that in the future it will be completely polished off. In which Raphtalia and Philo ask what it is exactly, and he basically says that it's armor that can fight. And he explains it in such a way that is pretty vague, but he mostly just says that it's the perfect balance between defense and offense, and that's what he kinda needs. With all that said though, the wave begins, and protecting Loot Village begins. Frankly, it's very easy this time around. They're pretty strong, they have insane weapons. Naofumi, on the other hand, is also extremely strong. And yes, he might be limited in terms of his attack power and defense or whatever, but a 50-50 split between his weapon and also his pretty good armor, well, let's just say it fends off really, really well. A lot better than it would even in canon. Naofumi is extremely powerful. Let's not downplay that by any means. His party members are feeling the effects of him being so strong as well. He levels up by creating things, and the last couple days he's been just creating things. So he's seeing a ton of benefits. His fighting prowess just on his own may not be amazing of some sorts, but it's still pretty good. Even with that said though, 3 hours pass and the wave is still not over. This makes Naofumi and his party worry, so they decide to head off to check out what's going on in terms of the main boss. When they arrive, it seems as if this main boss is still alive and not dead yet. And well, they have to put matters into their own hands. Naofumi spotting out exactly what they should be attacking, the shadow of the Dutchman. Right when they attack it, the Soul Eater appears. He throws a capsule toward the Soul Eater, and it basically creates this giant net, covering it and then electrocuting him insanely bad, eventually killing the Soul Eater in one foul swoop. Raphtalia just slices it, and so does Philo. It was kinda easy, underwhelming of some sorts, but just as Naofumi begins to think this, another Soul Eater arrives. He's about to pull out another capsule and basically do the same, or employ the same strategy, but for some reason, the Soul Eater gets completely destroyed by an outside being. Naofumi throws a couple capsules on the ground, fearing that this will be a worse enemy, and he would be right. The arrival of the Raven invader, a woman by the name of Glass, wearing a black kimono and wielding 2 twin-bladed war fans. This is the true enemy of the wave. She stands in front of the other heroes, and the 3 other heroes go to attack her, but are immediately pushed away and dismantled, destroyed, and Naofumi stands in front of her, waiting for her to basically say a word. Glass begins to speak, pointing at him, saying that he seems strong, but he also seems odd. She swore that she got intel about, well, there being a shield hero, but there's no shield hero here. Naofumi shrugs. Yeah, I'm no shield hero, but I am something else. Something better, in my opinion. In which Glass is kind of confused as he activates all 3 of the capsules that were surrounding Glass. This creates a triangle, encapsulating Glass within it, and basically puts up a force field that will not let her out. She goes to strike at the glass, which is ironic, or the force field, and goes to break it. But as she does this, Naofumi puts a ton of experience and his stats into that said thing. Once he does that, well, she's trapped. There's no getting out. She may be, in terms of brute strength, slightly stronger than Naofumi, and it would have been one heck of a fight. But once she's stuck in there is no getting out. He begins chatting with her, asking what she wants exactly, and she explains that she will not be talking unless she gets out of here. Naofumi says that unfortunately that cannot happen. He cannot let her out. Time slowly ticks away as their conversation really gets nowhere until Glass finally admits what she wants. She wants to save her world, in which Naofumi says that he wants the same. He wants to save his world as well, or Rautalia's world more specifically. Philo chimes in saying that it's her world as well, but he just said that he was making a point. In which Glass shakes her head, saying that he doesn't understand. They all 4 need to die so that her world can live. Naofumi finds this to be extremely outlandish, that this is not the case, that there's another way, there always is, but Glass shakes her head, believing that there truly is no other way. She then says that she led up her part of the deal to let her go before the wave closes, and Naofumi just sighs, putting the barriers down and retrieving immediately the other 3 capsules, telling her to leave now, that this act of mercy will not be upon her the next time she shows up. But he does offer that helping hand, the helping hand to save her world on top of his own, that they can figure something out. Glass shakes her head and kind of doesn't know what to say as she leaves back into the wave. It was so easy it seemed, but it really wasn't. Naofumi takes a knee on the ground, kind of tired. He says that putting all that strength into that glass, or the glass box, or that force-filled box, well, took a lot out of him. And frankly, it's not something he can sustain for a long period of time. And transferring his stats over to something that is more or less not attached to him is not the best use. Frankly, especially with an opponent as strong as her. The other 3 heroes are just baffled at the fact of what Naofumi was able to do. Obviously, they notice the flaws in what he just did, he just showed it, but nonetheless, Naofumi seems to be leaps and bounds ahead of them. And not only that, Naofumi is so far ahead of them to the point that he's thinking of different ways as they speak to get stronger. After a fight they just had, Naofumi is truly a different type of person, a true inventor at heart. Naofumi just wants to get stronger. In his world, he just wanted to make better things, and that's exactly what it is here. That's his whole goal. That's all he wants to do. He is basically in the perfect line or course of everything he normally would do in his own world. He's happy with this. Yes, he feels the threat, the impending doom in terms of the waves, but he's happy to do what he's doing. But even with this said, the king has questions. The royalty, the royal family has questions. Naofumi is hiding something. That's what the king thinks, and he brings this up to Naofumi. Naofumi says that he isn't hiding anything. He'll tell him anything he really wants. But he isn't hiding a damn thing. He's been really transparent about everything that's going on, about who he is. He's the creation hero. He figured out ways to create different weapons, armor. You can see it on his partners, on his party. And, well, the king says that he needs to make them for the other heroes. But Naofumi says that, unfortunately, he's not sure if that's even possible. But on top of that, well, they all need to be on the same page before he does something like that. He cannot give them the power and them use it, well, poorly. He cannot give them the strength to basically take off a building, but then proceed to give them the strength to kind of blow up a planet. He makes this analogy or this comparison for the fact that, well, you can't give someone that is ill-prepared ultimate power. And he truly believes that. And he believes that in his inventions, and he believes that with the people that he's around. He begins to explain. Ren and Itsuki, they're capable, but they still aren't in the correct mindset. Motoyasu, as the king must know, is very manipulative. Or, well, how does he say it? He's easy to be manipulated. And, well, the king asks why Naofumi would, well, accuse him of already knowing, and Naofumi says that he would know because his daughter is trying to manipulate him, and they've seen it all the steps of the way. In which the king completely denies, and Naofumi says that's fine. He can deny it all he wants, it doesn't matter to him. That he hasn't really even spoken with the royal family, the king, and all of them, and frankly none of this really matters too much to him. That he actually just cares about his party, and he cares about, well, saving everybody, even depending on how bad they are. He then heads off, and the king begins to say that he will punish his party for basically what he said, but he doesn't even respond to this. He knows the king is not capable. Nobody in the royal kingdom is far capable of taking on his party, especially, well, frankly, any party of the heroes, even if they are on the weaker side. But especially Raftali and Philo, there is actually no chance in hell. So they continue on as Naofumi heads down the staircase. But just as he's doing so, a shadow appears, giving him this small amulet. He takes the amulet and is kind of confused seeing the logo of the Three Heroes Church. It seems like the Three Heroes Church has some underlying problems, or at least they are involved in stuff that, well, he truly cannot figure out on his own, at least not at the moment. He knows they're, well, rotten apples, but he really does need to get the class upgrades for his party. So he begins to head off with Raftali and Philo, and Melty actually meets with him. Melty begins to ask for them to reconcile with her father, but Naofumi says that, well, he's the only one that was spewing threats, that Naofumi did none of the sorts. And Melty is basically heartbroken to hear this, being that she pretty much trusts Naofumi wholeheartedly. The fact that Naofumi has really never lied, and frankly, Naofumi has done nothing wrong. Compared to the other heroes, he's basically a saint. But even with that said, well, Naofumi begins to explain to her various things, but as he turns and looks toward Melty, well, it looks like one of her royal knights is about to send a sword straight through her back. Naofumi steps in front of him, taking the blow on the chest. Luckily, his armor was on, and it was 80% armor and 20%, well, attack. And he took the blow like it was nothing at all. It seemed the blow did absolutely no damage, and Naofumi and his party proceed to knock out the rest of the guards, making one of them flee away. He then explains to Melty that they need to go. He throws her into the cart as they begin to just book it out of there. He explains to Melty that they are trying to assassinate her, and it's pretty obvious, and they need to get out of here now, and Shield Frieden will actually be a good place for them to go. Now, Fumi continues to tinker with something that he's been trying to make. Melty questions what it even is, and he explains that it's his way of protecting everybody, and he should be able to finish it in the coming day or so. And hopefully, because if he thinks what's going to happen is correct, well, let's just say there's some really bad backlash that is going to be on its way. Now, Fumi and them arrive in the forest. As they begin to leave, though, throughout this forest to head to Shield Frieden, it seems like the other three heroes arrive, including Mine, but Mine shows intent to basically strike Melty with full intention to kill. She explains that, oh, that's not her sister and that she is mind-controlled of some sort, and Motoyasu slightly believes her, but the other two heroes find this ridiculous. Naofumi throws an amulet or the little logo toward Ren, explaining that he needs to figure this out now. And Naofumi, well, he looks toward the other three heroes as the other three heroes stop everybody else that is following them, telling Naofumi to leave. Motoyasu is even slightly on Naofumi's side. Yes, he does maybe have some manipulation under his belt, and the fact that he's been getting manipulated pretty bad by Melty or Mine, and the fact that, well, he still kind of believes her. But on the side of the other two heroes, he does trust them a decent amount, telling everyone to stop following them, and Mine disagrees, saying that he's useless, that what is he doing, and they can't let him get away with Melty. But he explains, where would they even go with Melty? It's not like they're trying to kill her. They would have done it already. It doesn't make sense. And that, well, Mine was the one that was the closest one to actually killing her. And this awakens all the guards that actually didn't know Melty was basically Melty was about to get assassinated, begin to question what's even going on. Mine then says that she is the princess and that she should not be questioned in such a fashion, but the other two heroes, Ren and Itsuki, say that they do not follow their whole royalty thing. They don't care who's king, queen, princess, prince, they don't care. And that what's wrong is wrong, and that is obviously what is going on. That there is blatant treason going on with the so-called princess. And once they say this, Mine begins to throw a fit. But let's go back to Naofumi. Naofumi and his party, including Melty, are headed off to Shield Frieden. But a shadow then stops them, asking them to please go and speak with the queen first. And Naofumi believes that maybe this is the best course of action. But during this travel, he actually is forced to stop at a nearby house. A house that, well, would be pretty interesting. A nobleman by the name of Van Richnot basically allows them in and basically treats them in the nicest way possible, giving them food, a place to stay, all that good stuff. But eventually it would come to bite them. Staying in this manner, well, a nobleman by the name of Rabier would appear and escorts Melty out to his manor, and also takes Van Richnot more or less as a way of torture. He takes them away, and Raftalia, Naofumi, and Philo decide that they are going to take this into their own hands and head over to that manor. Once they arrive at the manor, they see tons and tons of demi-humans loyal to Richnot, basically sieging the gates for his release. Obviously he means a lot, and obviously he's never done anything wrong. Naofumi and them infiltrate the castle, where Richnot is actually getting tortured right in front of Melty. Naofumi assuming that, well, Rabier is probably threatening Melty as well, and not only that, hurting one of the nicest people he's actually met on this journey, he attacks Rabier, knocking him to the ground and keeping him there, putting shackles on his arms and legs and forcing him to stay still. Naofumi then helps out Richnot and basically gets him all healed up via a creation or a potion that he's made before that basically fully heals a person depending on how badly they're hurt. Van Richnot wasn't, well, maybe not fully healed. The torture was pretty bad, but not to the point where he was completely and utterly mutilated by any means, so he was able to regenerate or basically restore his health mostly to full. But even with that said, with Rabier completely captured, they decide to basically strap him down and bring him out on a chair and just throw him to the demi-humans that are over there. The demi-humans that basically captured Van Richnot, and let's just say they take their hatred out on him. Van Richnot heads back to his manor with Melty as well, but Melty decides that she actually wants to stay with Naofumi if that's okay, and Naofumi says that's fine. As he looks behind him, he sees that Raftalia is no longer there, and Philo says that she went off that way. Finding her, she actually looked through these prison cells, finding her old friend by the name of Keel. and then setting free any, people or slaves that were still there, and actually reuniting with her long-lost friend. With all that set, and with everything back to normal more or less, they begin to head off. That's until Philo begins to hear something odd. A woman calling out to her by the name of Vittoria, telling her to head to the lake. They head to this large lake, and when they arrive, the Filolial Queen in her giant form shows herself. She begins to explain that she wants to speak with the legendary creation hero and his party, transporting them to the Filolial Sanctuary in a far-away ruins. Naofumi and Vittoria talk on their own, asking about Philo's true nature, in which she just explains that she only grows to this magnitude and also the way she does because there's a hero raising her. And Naofumi learns more and more about Vittoria, and that she's frustrated that the heroes are just having this infighting. And she explains that she understands that there's these problems. But Naofumi explains that he's actually been trying to more or less cut off this tension between them, and it does seem like, at least between the sword and the bow, there isn't too much tension between him and them. Well, you could say Motoyasu, on the other hand, the spear hero, it might be a little bit different, but they're still on decent terms. She explains that decent terms is not good enough, and that they need to make sure they are on the right page. Naofumi promises this, but also says that he has a plan that will make him extremely strong, would make his party extremely strong, that all of this will fall into place, and he promises that, and Vittoria is happy to hear this, and thanks for all the help. But she does say that if they don't figure it out, that unfortunately she'll have to kill all of them. And Naofumi takes that as extra motivation, smiling and saying that he can tell that she's serious. And she actually does bring up the fact that she wants to test Philo, and that will happen in the morning. The next morning, they all wake up, and Melty is taken hostage. So is Naofumi, and basically Philo has to fight for the release of the people she cares about. This leads Philo to basically pushing herself to new heights, and she's able to land a small hit on Vittoria. And Vittoria, of course, lets them go, and Naofumi even apologizes. Philo and Rautalia are confused, but they kind of explain they staged the whole thing, in which they all get mad at him, obviously besides Vittoria because they staged it together, but they did it as a test, or at least Vittoria wanted to do it as a test. She then says that she'll be sending them to the nearest hero possible, and they'll be hopefully speaking soon, but on better terms, especially with the rest of those heroes all, situated, you could say. And Naofumi says he will do his best, as all four of them are transported away to the nearest hero. When they arrive, they pray to the gods, whatever god is out there, that this isn't Motoyasu, and unfortunately no god is listening, because they are fronted with Motoyasu and his party. Yes, this wouldn't be as bad as in canon, but mine already put it in his head that he, Naofumi, killed Ren and Itsuki, in which Naofumi shuts that whole thing down extremely quick, explaining that how would that make sense when they went opposite directions. Naofumi literally wasn't even near them, and they left with, obviously mine and Motoyasu and all of the royal knights, that they were going the opposite direction. He was going to shield Frieden to get class upgrades, and that didn't even happen because of a ton of other stuff. And he begins to explain this stuff, and Motoyasu actually does listen. He hears them out, and mine says that he must be lying, but Motoyasu continues to listen. Naofumi explains that they need to come together as heroes, and he hopes and hopes that they are not truly dead, but he knows that Ren and Itsuki are stronger than that. They wouldn't just die. And as they're talking about this, let's just say Motoyasu is actually listening, and this is going pretty well, especially because Naofumi has no priors at all. But just as they continue this conversation, Philo shouts at Naofumi, saying that above, he needs to protect them right now or else they're all gonna die. And he's confused but just listens, throwing out a capsule, creating a barrier, putting all his power into that barrier, telling everyone to brace themselves, that he can protect them, but let's just say that it's not gonna completely nullify everything. So he braces himself, trying to protect everybody in that bubble, as the blast, a giant blast that Philo felt coming, strikes the barrier extremely hard that it almost begins to crack and break. But luckily Naofumi is able to restrict it, stop it, and stop the blast entirely. But as his bubble cracks and breaks, he regains all his strength back into his armor and weapon, and he looks toward what just did it. It was the Pope. The Pope of the Three Heroes Church is now upon them, and the battle between good and evil is going to be insane. Naofumi stands his ground, telling the Pope that he has one chance to give himself in and basically just more or less put himself in prison, or he's going to have a really, really hard time. And Naofumi makes this clear. And Raphtalia and Philo are shocked to see how confident Naofumi is currently, as if he has a plan up his sleeve. But let's just say he kinda does. Naofumi waits for a response as the Pope mocks him. "You? Really? Gonna put me away? I'm going to rain divine justice upon all of you." The Pope, about to strike them once again, Naofumi clicks something on his gem. And the gem that he once had in his chest, it begins to float outward. Wait, no, that's a different gem. The gem he got from the dragon. The little shard he got from the dragon begins to form into one solid, seeming red gem. But as the gem begins to change in color to the color of red, armor begins to emerge around him. This black armor begins to cover him in a metallic form, creating perfect armor around him, but also making himself a tangible weapon. He makes one of his arms a complete blade, and the rest of him is just normal. It seems like he finally cracked the code. The code to having both defense and offense at the same time and not restrict himself at all. Now Naofumi can fight unrelenting. Naofumi charges at the Pope, and the battle is insane. The blasts that begin to hit Naofumi's armor just bounce off. The blast from this ancient weapon isn't making a budge, not even a scratch on Naofumi's armor, but just as the Pope thinks he has a clear shot, two very familiar faces come out of nowhere, shooting him in the arm and also slicing at him as well. Ren and Itsuki are still alive, and luckily now they can fight as an entire unit, as an entire group of heroes. The four heroes are now here together. Just as the Pope begins to think that he's losing ground, he decides that he's going to take out his trump card. His triumphant defeat will not happen. He makes a cathedral around all of them and begins to gloat toward them, but Naofumi is having none of it, seeing that all four of them are basically in unison now. It feels normal. Motoyasu isn't accusing him of anything. Ren seems to be a nicer guy, and so does Itsuki, taking the world a lot more serious. He looks at his party members to think about all the times they've had throughout this. Just as he looks back at Ren though, his armor begins to flare and fire and hurt him extremely bad. The rage from the dragon, seemingly in the gem that he's created, is backfiring on him. It's now corrupting him, making him angry, remembering every little bad moment, everything from his world to this world. He's basically freaking out and opens his eyes slightly to see Raphtalia, to see Philo, to see Melty right next to him, holding him, basically trying to get him to stop. But as they do this, from his fingertips to his chest, it begins to turn white. His black armor that was once there turns white, and so does the gem. The gem begins to change from white to a rainbow-esque color, very translucent of some sorts, and he stands and stares at the Pope. He's even stronger now. This armor that has been created seems to be not cursed, but blessed. Naofumi goes charging full speed at the Pope, and it's not even close. The Pope can't even keep up. Naofumi has truly created something that is revolutionary, especially for this world. He sends a blade to the Pope's chest, and it begins to vaporize the Pope entirely, cleansing the Pope of his evilness, and ironically enough, he'll be being judged by God very soon. He's defeated, and Naofumi walks toward the other three heroes, and they are just shocked in awe at what Naofumi just showed, and Naofumi shakes his head. I don't even know what I just did. He passes out on the ground, but Raphtalia and Philo catches him before he hits it, at least on his face. They take him away just as the queen arrives with her army. Naofumi, waking up 3 days later, is kind of confused at what occurred. It seemed like it kind of took a lot out of him, transitioning from a curse series to a blessed series in a matter of instantaneous, action. He was feeling the effects of the curse series, but then the blessed series stabilized him for a little bit, but that drastic change hurt him. But luckily, none of his stats were even affected. Actually, more benefited than affected at the end of the day. And Naofumi is happy to hear this. As he gets up, he actually sees the queen. The queen apologizes for everything. The king, her daughter, but Naofumi cuts her off, saying that it's fine, that he figured it out at the end of the day, and that she had her own duties to handle. In which the queen is shocked to see this and hear this. She thought that he would be resentful, would be mad, but he seems so calm about it. And Naofumi says that is just what this world has given him. A calmness, a way of feeling, a way of relaxing, a way of creating things and feeling as if he was making a difference now, once again in a different world. And she is happy to hear this, and Naofumi begins to basically have all the festivities going on. During this time, obviously the princess in terms of mind, and also the the king have gotten extremely punished in terms of their titles being ripped away, and they're just normal people now. But even with that, Mind still loves to do her trickery, but it's not like it will exactly matter in the short term, at least not right now. Eventually leading to the Four Heroes Council meeting. One of, let's just say, many. They speak, all four of them talk about everything that's going on, about the way they leveled and all that such stuff. Of course, they do have minor arguments about what's better, but at the end of the day, they do agree that combining all of them should have some benefits. Naofumi keeping them kind of all in check, and the fact that Naofumi has only helped and not hurt anybody at this point, well, let's just say Naofumi is definitely on the up and ups in terms of all the heroes. Yes, they're not the most perfect team, but they are getting there, and Vittoria would definitely be happy that they're able to reconcile to this point, at least to this minimum state. Naofumi then explains that he should be able to create something for all three of them. They're confused and ask what he's talking about, and he explains that the way all his, suit and stuff works, and it should benefit them. He says that it's a little confusing and a little thing he might not be able to figure out completely, but they cut him off and ask if they can get the same armor he has, but he shakes his head, saying that took him forever to even figure out, and it took a very specific circumstance to even unlock. And they kind of understand, but they're kind of sad that they're not able to wield that. But he does explain that Philo and Raphtalia have something similar to what he's going to provide them. He won't provide them a weapon, but he will provide them a modifier, an upgrade modifier that would allow their weapons to even get stronger. And they're happy to hear this as he throws them all three a capsule. And the queen is extremely ecstatic to see the cooperation that Naofumi is giving. And after the fact, she does announce something even better. Good news after good news. A Calmira Archipelago event is upon them, and they can go get bonus experience points. Naofumi and his party decide that is a great idea, so they head off on a boat, and during this boat ride, of course they do not get their own little quarters, but they do find some new, travelers. These travelers' names were Lark and Therese. Naofumi looks toward their weapons. One has a scythe and the other has multiple gems, and he says that they're very, very pretty. He even begins to create 3 or 4 of them, giving them to Therese, saying that, well, some people really do love their gems, huh? And she is in complete awe, saying that it's amazing that she has her own gemstones as well, or this like rough, basically not fully polished gemstone, and asks if he can actually create that as well. He puts it in his palm of his hand and immediately just changes it, and she's kind of confused at how he's even able to do that, and he gives it back to her, saying that, well, it's actually one of his perks as a hero, and he was able to do that after he crossed the level boundary of 50. But it's something pretty simple, but I guess in this instance it was pretty useful, in which both of them thank him, and, well, Therese starts bawling her eyes out. In terms of Lark, he's kind of confused, thinking that why would she be crying over some gems or some minerals. And Naofumi kind of laughs at this and tells Raphtalia, see, they're not so bad. And they're confused at this comment, and he smiles. I know who you two are. It's pretty obvious. And frankly, that weapon kind of gives you away. I hope you're not after something, as in terms of killing us. That would be unfortunate. But I guess we'll have to see, right? Pretty soon. Just as they cross the borders of Kalmyra, no one is talking anymore. Naofumi begins to speak once again and says that he didn't mean to throw the tone off the mood. Frankly, he's pretty at peace with what's going on. He already offered their buddy. He assumes they know Glass, that he would help as much as he possibly can. It's definitely something to think about. He looks at his stopwatch as they cross into Kalmyra, and it says that there's literally 4 days until a next wave, which confuses him, and he shows this to Raphtalia, and she thinks that this is an error, but he says that there's no way it is, because he linked basically perfectly in terms of the hourglasses. And he shows this to Lark and Therese, and says he assumes they knew about this. And they kind of nod. They're already guilty as hell, and frankly Naofumi already figured it out. My guy is a genius, of course, and analyzing a situation like this wasn't too far-fetched. He does bring up something to them, that they can train together, level up. He wants to help them in their quest to save their own world. And he tells them that that's all he wants, the safety of his world, but also theirs. They say that he sounds very familiar to one of the other heroes in their world, and he begins to say that she must be extremely smart. They ask how he knows it's a she, or how he knows that the hero is a she, and he just says that he assumed. Frankly, these other guys that he has, all being men, are kind of idiots. He kind of laughs about this, and Therese kind of looks at Lark and laughs as well. And he kind of shrugs, saying that he gets it. He would do anything to save his world as well, but this isn't the way, not the way to handle all of this going on. But he promises that they can figure this thing out, and it's their choice what they want to do once this wave begins. They officially arrive at the hotel, and they actually begin to train with Lark and Therese. Naofumi has already told the Queen about the occurrence, and they actually get their naval fleets out there way sooner than normal, and their training is pretty fruitful. And they notice pretty quickly that Naofumi is extremely strong, and he's not even using his weapon that he showed against the Pope, in which they don't even know about, but that's beyond the point. He continues to train with them, leveling up and doing various things as well. Also, this does give a chance for Raphtalia and Philo to train up as well. I know I totally did not talk about them getting their class upgrades, but we can assume that they got their class upgrades because, you know, the whole Pope thing already happened. I apologize for skipping out on that. But, as you know, they did get their class upgrades, and they continue to level up. With the base stat upgrade, especially from Vittoria, they have some pretty impressive stats at this point, and so does Naofumi. But with all the time running down, it's almost that time. The time for the wave. They all sail out, waiting for the wave to happen, and when it occurs, they fend off against the smaller monsters in the water, in which the other heroes are a good bit stronger than normal, and they are basically defeated. The smaller fish in the water are defeated, and Naofumi sees the giant monster. Therese and Lark kill the monster in an instant, And Naofumi hovers over and flies to them in his new, more or less, suit. A suit of armor, it seems, completely of this white color and a gem that is very translucent. He flies over using the power and fire of the dragon that has been cleansed and arrives right in front of Lark and Therese, asking them what their choice is. Lark puts up his scythe, but then proceeds to put it on his back, and Therese even says herself that the gems that he gave her, they wouldn't want to fight him anyways. Glass even arrives through the wave, speaking with him as well, asking if that option was truly something he would do. Naofumi nods, saying that he would openly help them no matter what, and they'll be in touch very soon. So, all three of them head off back into the wave, back to their home world. As Naofumi watches this, he realizes that protecting this world is going to be even harder. He not only has to protect the world that he was summoned to, but now he has to help save the world that others were summoned to as well. But with that said, that is for a story for another time. If you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like, sub, comment down below any suggestions you have for future what ifs. And yeah, that's about it. Hope y'all enjoyed. As I said in the beginning, season 2 not finished yet, so I won't be doing it yet, at least not until about halfway through, until I kind of know where the anime is going. Because right now, I'm not so sure where, I know what the anime is doing in terms of the light novel, but they also do have a tendency of changing some things up. So I kind of want to wait a little bit to see what happens. But yeah, with that said, I hope y'all enjoyed, and we'll probably end up coming back to some of these what ifs anyways. And I hope all y'all have an amazing day. Later.